Hi, everyone. This is Sam Miles here, the head of training and consulting at Knowledge E. We are here for another installment of Knowledge Speaks, conversations towards a more knowledgeable world. And today we are going to be talking about the very interesting topic of open access. Before we dive into the questions, I would love to hand it over to my colleague, Emily, who is our head of publishing. Emily, can you tell everybody why we decided to talk about open access for this conversation?
So open access is, I think it's fair to say, one of the hottest topics in academia, in research right now globally. And Open Access Week is coming up at the end of October. It's a global initiative, and this year's theme is titled, "It Matters How We Build Structural Equity," and is focusing on enabling the fair sharing of knowledge, outputs and scientific research amongst researchers in both developed and developing economies. And this is something that we're very committed to. More generally, as a company, we work with institutions across emerging markets, but particularly within the MENA region, as a Diamond Open Access publisher. And we believe that open access is more generally hugely important to the scholarly ecosystem. And one of our goals is more generally to support awareness of open access within this region. And that's why we're doing a host of things around Open Access Week. So we've got sort of quizzes, a very large symposium on the 28th of October, and today's podcast, amongst other things.
Fantastic. Well, I'm really excited to dig into it. Before that, I just want to say thank you to all our colleagues who are joining us today. We have Karin, who is our strategy expert at Knowledge E. Karin, give everybody a wave. We have Cameron, our CEO of our company. And we are really excited today because we have a special guest with Professor Kamel, and he is the managing editor of the Directory of Open Access Journals. So, Professor, we are so happy to have you joining us today, and we're really looking forward to hearing some of your insights. I want to kick things off with a question to get the conversation going, which is, would you say that currently open access is more widely accepted or adopted within certain disciplines more than others? And which ones, and why do you think that is?
Thank you very much. I am very happy to meet you. So I am Kamal Belamel, managing editor in the Douage. So open access recently as a new model as adopted by a researcher, especially for Global South, because the barrier of publishing and need to have more restrictive online access to research output, such journal article, because I am interested especially in open access scholarly publishing. And open access is more than free, because, as you know, there is a misconception about, for example, open and free. And as you know, there is a wealth of free to view content available online, but the majority of this content is not free to use. So publishing open access is mainly costly, because as you know that they need some there is a lot of models, gold, green, and especially almost journal shift to open access are gold. So they still APC need to be covered by a research or their institution or their vendor. So of course, open access is opportunity, especially for global out, to access for the knowledge and to have access for open science and open culture. But in the meantime, it's a barrier, because we seen that more problems with those open access, especially with APC. We can discuss, yeah.
I was going to say, if I could jump in. I think to answer the second part of your question about disciplines, I think there is a huge disparity. As we all know, there's a lot of money in sciences and STEM. It's where there's money, it's where there's profits to be made on a commercial perspective. And it's also a lot more prestigious in some people's minds and in some funders' minds. So there's a lot of support for publishing in those disciplines, which is why I think the majority, in fact, all but one of our journals currently are in the sort of STEM field that we publish and host for others. Whereas humanities, my own background is 19th century religion and English literature, which is fairly niche. So there's not a great deal of funding at the best of times, pretty niche. And but in humanities more generally, we don't have those big funding organizations. We don't have the big pharma or things like the Wellcome Trust to really drive research, to fund research, but also more importantly, to pay for the APCs that Professor Kamal was just discussing. So if you're a humanities expert, and I think to a slightly lesser extent social sciences, you end up having to foot those bills yourself. So that means that there is a slower take up in the humanities more generally, but also in my field in particular, in literature. Literature research is largely the purview of a lot of very small literary societies. We tend to focus on specific authors or specific periods in literature or specific cultures. So it might be Arabic literature or more specifically Egyptian literature, or I am on the editorial board of the Byron Journal, so it's a specific poet in a specific period in English literature. And the society runs those, and it's very important for this continued sustainability for societies that those remain subscription based, because they need the revenue in order to continue to exist. So it means that open access is a lot harder for them. But Karen also manages a journal in library sciences, so she has a slightly different view.
Sure, thanks, Emily. I think that was a great distinction about why maybe different disciplines have different interests. And thank you again, Professor Kamal, for your perspective, and particularly recognizing the differences between the North and the South, and the language challenges that exist. The open access movement began in the English language research literature, so that's also a place where it starts. Just to go back then to social sciences, you mentioned the STEM and the hard sciences, and I think also a couple of reasons that open access has been important. One of them is this sort of idea that being able to share the knowledge more widely. And a lot of times, yes, there's more funding in STEM, but also the STEM fields have a tendency to move more quickly. And also a lot of the science, technology, engineering, and math research journals have a very practical, real world impact much more immediately. And so the push to be able to get that information to more, particularly to share with developing countries, is important. In my field in library and information science and social sciences, but particularly in libraries, we also have a more sort of open attitude in general. Our field in general is, and particularly libraries, is all about sharing as much as possible. And so there's sort of a philosophical approach to that is driven, at least my social science field, towards trying to support as soon as open access was available, and is driven by people, a lot of people who were in the library field, to try and promote a kind of publishing that allows more people to benefit from that content through, as Professor Kamal said, the free and open space.
Yeah, I think one of the underlying issues over here is the economics. So at the end of the day, the whole process of publishing is a value-added process. So we're talking about the peer review, there's different elements to it, and somehow these costs need to be covered. So for example, the publishers, they've got the infrastructure, the peer review process, the whole infrastructure that goes into publishing. And at the same time, if the business model is flipped in the open access world, where instead of you're paying to access, you're paying to publish, somehow these costs, they need to be able to cover for the journal. So that's why, as everyone mentioned, like disciplines play an important part, because you've got the supply, you've got the demand, you've got the readership, you've got the authorship. So all of these play an important role in, for example, a journal or a specific subject area being more successful than another one. So predominantly the early experiments on open access, especially from the publisher's side, did start on biomedical journals because of the I don't know if it was the number of submissions, that there was more willingness to pay, the funding of the research, the availability of the funding. All these played an important role. So I think this underlying factor is very important to keep in mind, because that really helps explain a lot of decisions and a lot of reasons for something being taken up or not.
Cameron, that's a really interesting point, and I think you're helping us to go into the conversation. So a lot we've been talking so far is around the economics, and you had just mentioned kind of the start of some of these journals you said in medicine and in biosciences. Yeah. So in addition to that, are there some other open access business models that you know of that have proven to be sustainable? And Professor Kamal, we would love to hear your thoughts on this as well too. I think with your position, you would share some insight. So anything you want to add to that, specifically talking about those sustainable business models for open access?
Yeah, I think as you know, there is a plan S for Europe. But outside Europe and nothing, for example, for MENA region, North Africa and the Middle East, I think there is no model. And actually, we can speak about a global equity business model. I mean that, for example, in my region for North Africa, I cannot publish in, as you know, that. The publication fees for scholarly journal are increasing dramatically year by year, especially in this pandemic period, and a lot of big publisher shift to open access, and but in reality with very high APC. So, for example, a researcher from income a country, or for example from North Africa, for me, I cannot publish in journal open access with $2,000. It's about 3 or 4 months of my salary, so it's not possible. And our institution cannot cover these fees. So to speak about the global equity business model for open access scholarly publishing, there is a new idea developed by some researcher, for example, for PLUS. I mean, this equitable business model addresses the challenge around the financial equity. This model based on a waived program taking in consideration geographic, for example. So we can shift away all fees for authors, and then we ask their institution, and then to those based on institution location. So the institutions that are in high income country, as defined by the World Bank leading classification system, pay the highest fees, for example, and institutions from upper middle income country pay lower fees, and institutions from low and lower middle country pay the lowest set of fees. So and also we can invite institutions from for example, high income country to participate regardless of World Bank leading classification, to support their colleague in the lower middle income. This is a model inspired from Plan S, because Plan S, as you know, that all institutions will, for example, Byron consortium funding, ministry, they made or they prepare a budget for and then a publisher from this country cannot pay their institution pay for them. But outside Europe, outside America, for example, for the people or researcher in Africa cannot pay fees, cannot access for those high impact factor journals with high qualities. So this is also a barrier for the access for the knowledge.
Yeah, very good points, Professor mentioned. And to me, it reminds me of a process that we faced in the subscription world. So back in the days, there were initiatives like Hinari, Agora, INAS, where, for example, to access certain databases from publishers or a specified list that was provided by the publishers, you would get financial breaks, or there were pricing tables where low, medium income countries would have reduced subscription price to access. So this is now also, as mentioned, started to appear. You have a lot of states, not many, but it's starting in certain countries where, similar to Plan S, where a specific country is supporting more and more researchers. We have examples in Egypt, where we see that there are some APCs covered by the government contracts that are started. But speaking of business models, again, it's all about the finances. In the old world, in the subscription model, you would still have people behind barriers and not being able to access. And it's the same on an open access world. There's still barriers for people to be able to publish. And I think from our side, we've ourselves as Knowledge came up with middle of the ground approach, where even though we're supporting the open access movement and we have an open access publishing arm, we've also created a movement or a product using the you can say the Netflix model or iTunes model, where basically you can have unlimited access to content, but at a minimum fee, and in a way spreading that across. So instead of like paying hundreds of thousands of dollars to access databases, you pay the price of a single article, and then you have unlimited access. So this is a business model that we've launched in many countries, and we've started in order to well, maybe one day we'll have an open access world and everything would be accessible. Then you do have the issue of discoverability, of course, but in the meantime, we think that this is also a middle of the way solution to be able to reduce the barriers to access scientific information and having access to knowledge.
Yeah, great.
Great point. I'd also just like to jump in too and say, I'm not sure, when we talk about business models, there's a couple of pieces. One is the business, as both of you have said, there's from the publisher side and also from the author side, right? So what does the publisher, what does the author have to pay? But the fact remains is it still costs money to actually publish stuff, right? Like you need a team of platform, right? So somebody's got to pay. And I don't know if this is really a business model thing, but everything that you both said makes me also think about how in the recent years, research funders have more and more frequently been getting familiar with open access and actually requiring in or expecting in the research proposals themselves that there is funding built in for author processing charges, article processing charges, sorry, to help support the publication in open access, rather than just expecting them to do it, but to actually encourage people to build that into their funding proposals for their research in the first place.
And also there's organizations like F1000 that build platforms for those big research funders, open access platforms where there are fees, but instead of almost building it into the grant, the funder goes, okay, well, I'm going to give you X and retain that tiny bit to cover the publishing costs on my open access platform, again, to enhance the greater accessibility of research.
Yeah, all really good points. So, okay, we've spent pretty much the whole conversation talking about economics. I want to ask a couple of questions to get us talking about some other stuff. So in the very beginning, Professor Cannell said something and I took a note, and he said open access is more than free. Right. And it brought up this idea that there's misconceptions around it. So we've talked a lot about the misconceptions around it's not actually free, it still costs money. Are there other misconceptions that either frustrate you about open access, or that you just want to talk about and clear up some of those other misconceptions aside from it not actually really being free?
Well, if no one else is going, I have a huge list as an open access publisher.
Pick them off. Tell us your list.
I think as an open access publisher, particularly where we focus in emerging markets, where perhaps the movement is as developed yet, and where also a lot of the time that there's a lot of predatory publishers already well established. And I think that's one of the biggest issues we face is the conflation of open access and predatory practices, which obviously the open access gave rise to predatory publishers because suddenly they could charge ludicrous amounts of money sometimes for not provide any services at all. It's a con, really, and it's a very sad result of this movement towards open access that people have decided to profit unfairly and with illegitimate activities, and I think that's a real shame. And sadly, it does undermine the development of open access on a wider scale. And also for the individual, it makes it very hard for particularly junior scholars. They get caught out once by someone promising them amazing publishing and pretending to be Scopus indexed, or pretending that if they publish with this journal, it's going to advance their career, and it doesn't. And that one person then obviously talks to other people, and more people are becoming aware of predatory practices now, which is great. Obviously, it's one of our other initiatives is Think Check Attend, and which is a sister to Think Check Submit, and both of them are focused on countering predatory practices in academia. And the more awareness about that, the better. However, the downside is that in a number of cases, people are assuming that predatory practices and open access are one and the same, particularly if a journal does require APCs of some sort. And I think that is a huge problem. Karen has something.
Oh, I totally agree. And I think it's also related to the misconception about the quality of the journals generally. So even if we're not talking about predatory journals, what I hear a lot, and I'd be very interested, Professor Kamel, to hear your perspective, but what I often hear is that just straight up open access journals are not high quality, right? And and a lot of times the reason people seem to think that is because many open access journals may not be indexed in the big indexes, right? And part of the reason for that is because in order to get indexed in those journals, the journal has to be around for a long time. And many open access, this is a very new movement, right? So many open access journals don't have the history of citations and impact over time yet to qualify for those indexes, which is why, and this is where I'm going to turn this over to you, Professor Kamel, is that the directory of open access journals is so valuable, because I think from my perspective, the DOAJ is providing a list of open access journals, not just the list, but you guys actually you vet these journals, right? You know, you make sure that there's not predatory journals in there. So there are open access journals, and as long as that they're peer reviewed and that they have quality control, so that even if they're not in these big well-known indexes yet, you guys still provide that next level of quality assurances. Is that right?
Yeah, because for example, if we can take the example of South Africa, they put in their policy, for example, if journal indexed in DOAJ, that it means this journal is sustainable and is high quality, because as you know, we have basic criteria, and those criteria are usually inspired from the best practice in publishing, in scholarly publishing. So to index journal, you have many basic criteria, as we look for example, for the peer review process, for example, and also we have to look, for example, for the intellectual property. I mean that a lot of also common misconception regarding the open access, that the authors means that they lose their intellectual property. So some authors ask, for example, to publish their articles with some open license, as you know, that you for some license, like for example Creative Commons, and those license protect the authors and can which allow to reuse and of material, provided that the original author is cited as at all?
As you mentioned, definitely not being indexed does not necessarily mean low quality. And, you know, of course you have in scientific methods, you've got different qualities, but you need to be able to provide the infrastructure for people for different levels to be able to share their scientific opinions, regardless of the advancements. And it's, of course, for the fellow scholars to verify that, to cite it, to use it, to reuse it, depending on the results. So I think one important issue over here is to be able to provide that infrastructure for different people with different backgrounds from at different levels to be able to publish and not be limited based on the different requirements from organizations. So of course, not being indexed does not necessarily mean quality, but sometimes it is a restriction that the authors are facing, depending on if they want to get promoted and depending on the mandates from the university. So this is also a different element that I wanted to mention. But in general, just a clarification in terms of open access. Open access has been around for quite some time, but in terms of the uptake, I think it's gained more and more momentum in the recent years. The Plannis has played an important role. The global tendency towards a more open flow of information and open science infrastructure has led to the way you also have consortiums now mandating and requesting for flip deals as part of their subscription to have APCs covered. So open access has been around for quite some time, but it has gained a lot of momentum in the recent years. And I think at the end of the day, we should always not miss the main point. And the main point is to be able to provide that infrastructure for scientists and researchers and scholars from around the world to be able to publish and to make it as accessible and discoverable, because that's also a lot of information is there, but it's not necessarily discoverable and it's hidden. To make it also discoverable to all the people. So that's the fundamental aim, objective, direction that I think all the various players in this industry need to have in mind.
Too right, Cameron. And you had said it's really picked up a lot of traction in recent years. I'm curious, do y'all think that the COVID pandemic has had an effect on open access publishing? And if so, what is that impact? How much does it extend? Is it going to affect the future? What do you think?
I would say just from two perspectives. As a researcher during COVID, being able to access content online was a lifesaver. I don't think I would have been able to produce half as many articles as I did if I had been able to access things, because there's no libraries. But also, I think through every level of education, from maybe not primary school, but certainly secondary school upwards, I think one of the things COVID has really highlighted is the importance of making sure all teaching materials are open access. And that's one of the reasons we're now launching an open access textbook service, is because it's become very clear that, you know, if you can't get into a library, you can't access photocopied versions from your teacher, you can't learn right now. And not everyone has the money to afford to buy those textbooks. I mean, particularly some of them, I've seen some for astronomy and things that cost, you know, $3,000 or $4,000, and you need 8 of them to complete 1 year's course. It's insane. No one has that kind of money. If you can't access a library, education can't happen now, particularly as increasingly people are working from home or learning remotely. I think there's been a huge uptick in that. So I think from a publisher's perspective, there's huge opportunity, but also from a researcher perspective, I hope over time that more and more content will be available so that we can all access it wherever we are in the world.
Yeah, I think one important point that was recently discussed in a meeting with one of the major editing service providers was that what open access created, since a lot of people have done lots of research during the previous years through their labs, through collaborations, but they didn't have the time to publish. So the pandemic and actually working from home and not having to have to go to their labs and to their places or to be on the field has actually created a lot of spare time for people to like write that long waiting paper or finish that article that they wanted to finish. And they've actually noticed a big surge in publication. So I think now with things opening back again and people having down, they were expecting for the numbers to go down, but definitely working from home or not being able to go on the field to conduct field research. And for example, scientific conferences, they lowered the numbers and they moved to a more online way. So it definitely has had an impact, bigger impact on open access. I'm not really sure, but as Emily mentioned, definitely accessibility played an important role. We saw from country to country, we had certain countries where they had a more digital, they had gone through a digital transformation, they had flipped classrooms, they had online content and online accessibility, and they managed to keep things moving. You had countries where schools were literally completely closed and there was no learning happening. So I think one thing that it did teach us is digital transformation is unavoidable, and we need to be mindful of that, and we need to be more prepared.
Yeah, really well said. Okay, I think I wanna wrap up with a very important question, and I feel like we're all gonna have things to say. So I think it is safe to say that all of us here on the call are part of the open access movement. So what do you all think the open access movement could do better in order to be more successful around the world, to continue to grow and to have all of the benefits that we had previously talked about in the call?
Shall I start?
That would be great, Cameron.
Since there's a moment of
Jump in on
silence.
the meaty question.
Yeah.
I'm always a big fan of openness and openness in a way that not everything is black and white. I think we need to take all aspects into perspective. Like for me, I wouldn't say like 100% open access is an answer. You always need to consider all the different aspects and all the different elements. And I mentioned that economics plays an important role. So on the publishing side, there is a added value system that has been put into place. And through the peer review processes and like marketing and discoverability and all these things and tools that I've mentioned, I think we need to have that open-mindedness when it comes to these issues. One thing that definitely I can see happening is it's not about the access to information, it's about how we access the information and how that information is analyzed or changed or used, or analytics will play a very important role. And this is a big focus area for all the different players in the industry. So accessibility is one issue, but what we do with the information and what we do, all the science that is going into it, AI is, even though many speak about AI, but it hasn't been that widely implemented and used, but there's definitely a lot of room for improvement. And at the end of the day, we need to find what we're looking for easier, and we need support on how to understand the data. So these are two focus areas that I would mention.
Super interesting. Thank you, Cameron.
So I'll jump in. So I agree with everything Cameron said, but I also want to add to go back to something you said, Cameron, and also Professor Kamel, about the restrictions, particularly from an institutional level, right, around promotion and tenure. And what I want to say is, as Professor Kamel said, that particularly for the journals that are indexed in the Directory of Open Access Journals, there's actually a fairly rigorous process of evaluating what's there to assure that credibility.
I want to add something, maybe to promote open access. We suggest also to promote open access policy. You know that for example, in MENA region, few countries have a policy for the open access, and I suggest also to create some open access platform for example, for open access journal that can help research and also people to publish in those journal, because with the policy or with the decision, I think that we can shift for more and more for open, and we can have new models.
I think that the impact of an open access publication for an author, for example, if I'm able to publish in an open access journal, that makes it more visible. More people have the opportunity to see it. And what does that mean? That means more people read my research and more people cite me, right? And the more citations I have, that's an in credit to my institution. And so for the institution to have a disincentive for me to publish in open access by not allowing that to give me credit towards promotion is actually it's sort of undermining the process. And so I think to strengthen open access, to spend time helping institutions, finding ways to help institutions revise those promotion and tenure policies around publication to support more open access credibility would go a long way.
Yeah. And if I could jump in there, that Karen, you just sums up perfectly. But one of the things we're looking to do as a company is create some sort of infrastructure to help the region move in that direction and help individual institutions get a better understanding of some of the benefits of open access that they might not currently be aware of, so that we can start to enact and support real change in the region. So what we're looking to do is develop some sort of regional association or initiative around open access, and really get a lot of institutions and government bodies and anyone really who wants to be involved to promote an awareness and understanding of open access just more generally across, I think, all the key stakeholders, whether you're at an institutional level, whether you're in the medical sciences, or even whether you're just a young student just about to do your first publication.
Yeah, you can see like Wiley acquiring Hindawi Publishing. That sends a strong signal into what the different publishers see as the future of publishing. And another point that I just thought of was, like, we have seen this in journalism, where online newspapers are now like asking for donations to be able to support journalism. You go to like Guardian, it's free, but then you'll be asked if you would like to sponsor and you would like to support. Maybe we'll start seeing more global and individual support of open access platforms. But definitely, as Professor Kamal mentioned, that it does seem to be the future, and we need to be prepared for that future.
Cameron, I think that is a very poignant and excellent thought to end this conversation with. So thank you all so much for your wonderful contributions. As always, it is a pleasure having these conversations towards a more knowledgeable world. Thank you for your time, and we will all see you at our next talk.